In this video, I want to talk about a new quilt pattern I've come up with. I'm calling it the Newspaper Quilt. Now, normally a quilt is layered with a top, usually pieced, a batting layer, and a backing layer. I'm going to show you in a minute how to take fabric and fold it so that you don't need the batting. This here is fabric that I've folded twice, which, you know, normal everyday sewing, we often fold things on 2 layers and stitch them, but I'm going to show you a different way to do it. And before I show you that, I'm going to be using my 1959 Spartan to make a 100 square 10 by 10 newspaper quilt. And I'm going to use a flower foot on this vintage machine. It will mount on the machine, but because this isn't a zigzag machine, it will be just doing circles instead of flowers or zigzag shapes. But the main thing for this quilt is this thread. This is a glow-in-the-dark thread. And I have the machine, I just wound a bobbin, and there's the cone of thread. And I will put the link for this thread in the information section of the video. And what I want to accomplish, the newspaper quilt, I've already made a couple of little quilts. I think they're 16 inches square, 4 by 4. I'm making a larger one, but the effect is, when I look at the quilt, I want to see the design, the stitching design. So I'm going to do basic circles just to see how this works and see whether or not the glow-in-the-dark thread really glows. It's a good, easy project to try out a new thread like this. Okay, now this is your basic flower foot. I use this most often on the Brother, one of the Brother machines. Or on the 237, the Singer model 237, if you're going to use, I'm sorry, that's the, it's the zigzagger, I'm thinking, the zigzagger attachment. They attach the same way. This is, they're out of China. I'll put a link to one of them in the information section. I haven't seen them made by any American manufacturers. And what I'm going to do is take the straight stitch foot off of here by loosening this screw, and I'm going to replace it with this one. And you can see here, right here is the, you slide that around the back and under, and this arm has to go above the needle clamp. Okay, so I have taken the straight stitch foot off. Here's the flower foot. I'm going to bring it around from the back. Put that right on there like that. I don't know why that's blurry. I can back that up in a second. Put the screw back in, and I'm going to take it off again because I have to get that arm above the needle clamp. Do it from the back. Now this particular screw to hold it in place doesn't have a slotted area for the screwdriver. Some machines do have those. You want to make sure it's tight. don't know why that's not focusing. It was in focus a moment ago. Then when you lower the foot, raise the foot, and when you buy a flower foot, they will. It comes with. Usually, they give you a video, and there are different. When you're using a zigzag, there are different ways you can change the thickness or the width of the zigzag stitch to make a slightly different design flower. When you're using it on a straight stitch machine like this, it's going to make a circle. So let me set this up so it's not blurry and show you the foot in action. Okay, I've done one circle. It's working fine. Like I said, this is the glow-in-the-dark thread, both the upper thread and the lower thread. And what could be wrong with my camera? Well, I'm going to continue. It seems to be not holding the focus very well. I will show you how this works. Now, that came unthreaded. The thread broke. I was going fast, but you can see on here the circles. One thing I can do is lengthen the stitch. Okay, I'm going to leave that blurry part in the video. I'm now holding the camera, and I don't think it'll go as blurry. That was actually, I'm going to leave that part in where the thread broke. A lot of videos, they show you how wonderful things are, and they don't show you how things can go wrong. When you buy a novelty type thread, like glow-in-the-dark thread, if it's going to break all the time, it's not worth buying. So I did another circle. I lengthened the stitch. I had it on 30 stitches per inch, and I should have checked that. But I lengthened the stitch, and I now have circles here that are in glow-in-the-dark thread. And this is just a test piece of fabric. And I don't necessarily, like if I had navy blue fabric and this is going to glow green, I think, then that would be a specific look you could think about in designing. The fabric I have is all random cottons, just regular patchwork type rag quilt is what it's going to be similar to. And I just want the quilting to show up as glow-in-the-dark. Now, glow-in-the-dark, my other things, only last about 2 hours at the most when you turn the lights off. But like for a child's quilt, if their quilt glows in the dark, I mean, that adds a nice touch to it. So the flower foot on a straight stitch machine will do circles. And that's what we're going to be adding. These are just over 1 inch in diameter. I don't know if I'll just put one in the center of each square, because that's all I really need to do. They end up being 5-inch squares. Or if I'll decide to do more. But let me show you the idea, really, of how you get to a newspaper quilt. Okay, this is the newspaper quilt pattern. And I actually have the pattern written out that I can add to the information section of the video. These are 2 little finished 16 square little quilts that are actually, these are going to go with stuffed animals. That one's got an S embroidered at it. And this one has a C at the beginning. But I want to show you these because of the weight. And the reason I call them a newspaper quilt, you may have seen my handy stitch curtain videos where I used a handy stitch, and in fact these in the center are a handy stitch. But the whole trick with a newspaper quilt is the fabric. It's not that you don't want to be able to afford batting, because that's not really the reason. This makes it, this is the easiest quilt in the world to make, but it makes a lightweight, yet warm enough blanket. It's just a nice, comfortable weight to grab and hold on to. So you'll need a template. Those were 8-inch squares that, when the fabric is folded, give you 4-inch squares, which sew up at 3.5. This is an 8.5-inch template, which, when folded, 4.25-inch square. So when you stitch them together, they'll be, each one will be 4 inches, and you can use that formula to make any size. For example, I may make a quilt that I start with 17 by 22 and fold it in half, which actually gives you, I think, 6 by 9, which is a rectangular panel. So the only trick to this is folding the fabric twice. So this is an 8.5-inch square, and these have been pressed. It's easier, they're easier to work with when you press them. And now the 2 inner layers make up what you would have as the batting. Now, as far as the handy stitch machines, you can just go around the edges or do random. The handy stitches will go through all of those layers. That's 4 layers of cotton, and the handy stitch will go through it. A Singer Model 20 has a little bit of a harder time. You want to look for if you buy a handy stitch, you want anything that says it'll go through denim. But you have to keep in mind you're sewing through 4 layers, and then when you're stitching them together, you stitch them like a rag quilt, where you stitch the rows together first, and then stitch row to row to row. But when you're doing this, and I've used pinking shears on the edges, now here you're going through 8 layers. So I recommend a machine, and that's part of why a bigger machine, and that's why I'm using the Spartan for this. But with just, so let's say you buy 50 8-inch squares, then you can make a 50 square quilt. Let's say you have leftovers from making something, but you can get an 8.5-inch square out of it. It's true patchwork. And without the batting, it ends up, it's like a summer weight, wonderful quilt. I mean, you could take it anywhere and feel comfortable. They're very comfortable, especially using cotton. So what I'm going to do with that glow-in-the-dark thread, and this is mostly Halloween or fall colors, so it's the perfect place to use glow-in-the-dark. And if you wanted to, you could get creative and do little ghosts or pumpkins or something. But I'm going to do circles probably in the middle. Not all of the squares are printed like that. There are some just random. So I'm probably just going to do a circle in the middle of each one, and then around the edges. And if I use the glow-in-the-dark thread on the whole project, meaning the edges, and then when I piece them together, the seams, that's what I'm not sure of. I may just do the glow-in-the-dark in the middle because I want the circles to show up, and then switch back to a regular thread for all the actual piecing. But by folding any square or rectangle twice, you don't have to be buying or using batting It's a wonderful machine quilting project as opposed to hand quilting. You could do it by hand, but it's a great machine quilting project. And like I said, I wrote it down. I have a rough pattern for it. I'll put that in the information section. So we have a 1959 Spartan, Singer Spartan. We have a modern flower foot that's going to make circles. We have glow-in-the-dark thread. We have fall fabrics, and we're going to make a newspaper quilt. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a couple of squares. I'm going to do, let's say, 8 squares with just a circle in the center. And then as it gets dark, we will check how it glows before I decide whether or not to do all the stitching with glow in the dark and what that would look like. The real advantage here with doing this type of a project only with 100 squares, you get to test out whether or not the thread is going to be worth it, if the design works out okay. You can do the whole thing by hand if you want to make it more of an heirloom piece. So on this, even though I have the machine set at, I now have it at 8 stitches per inch, I have to look at the actual flower foot. There are several lines here, and I'm wondering, I'm trying to see if there's a mark on the foot. My particular one doesn't have the directions with it. If you pick this up, so I'm going to fiddle with it a little bit. And the reason I'm saying that is even though I now have the stitches set longer, it's still doing very, very tight stitches. Maybe because it's not zigzagging, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with the machine, so it may just be the way I have the foot set. But I'm going to do some of these, and we're just going to find out if that circle shows up in the dark. Now, of course, the whole idea of the newspaper quilt is not solely connected to a flower foot. It's just the way I'm choosing to do this one. You can keep your straight stitch foot on or your zigzag foot and do 3 motion quilting. Or grid quilting. You can do any kind of quilting you want in each of the squares. The real value of making a quilt this way is that you don't have to have the batting, you don't have to go through all the layering and the pinning, and it's so simple to just make quilted squares like that and then put them together. And what I wasn't sure of is whether or not it would have enough weight to really feel like a quilt, and it does. It does. It's a very comfortable weight quilt. Okay, this is how I originally wrote up the pattern. Newspaper quilt, cut fabric into rectangles, 12 by 18, but then I'm probably going to do 17 by 22. Fold in half, which gives you 12 by 9, or, and I don't have my glasses on, 17 by 11. Then fold in half again, and you get 6 by 9, or 8.5 by 11. That's written in pencil. You can probably hardly see it. Design each page using text, dingbats, circles. If I want to, I can embroider each page instead of quilting. So embroider or quilt each page. Sew together on the 9-inch side with rectangles in rows, sew rows together. That's my original. So then I'm taking this. This is what's wonderful about only having to fold the fabric. As you can see by that original pattern, you can either design stuff using all kinds of stuff, or you can do the absolute minimum, which is a circle. Now, quilting is really to hold the 3 layers together, in this case 4 layers, to hold them together so that the fabric doesn't shift and you get a bunched up commercial batting in the middle of a square, so it doesn't bunch. That's why you quilt. That's the practicality of it. And then people, of course, have made it into an art form. And so we have several of these with the absolute minimum of quilting that's needed to keep the fabric from shifting. And I did about 8 squares in like less than 10 minutes. But this is just the center, and obviously I haven't gone around the edges on these particular ones. So now we'll give it a little bit of time, and I'm going to come back when it's dark, and we'll see if this even shows up. I forget, I think the thread was $11 for 2,300 yards or something. And I figured it's probably going to be a one-time purchase for me because it would last, you know, that amount of yardage would last a while. If it doesn't glow like I want it to glow, I'll probably end up using it just like a regular thread spool. Maybe not. We'll see. This will be the easiest square to see it on with a black background, and we'll see what it looks like. Also, I'm laying these squares out so that they're exposed to light. Almost all of the glow-in-the-dark things I've come across, they really need to be exposed to light before they... It looks white. If it's not going to glow, it'll be white. Okay, now comes the fun part. It's dark out. I do have a light on in the room. I also went ahead and did some more handy stitching on this in the glow-in-the-dark for the larger stitches, just to be able to tell the difference between these tiny stitches and larger stitches. So I'm going to turn the light off. I do have to say, a little while ago what I did was shine a flashlight on this square for like 2 minutes, and then took the square in the other room in the dark, and it's glowing green. So it works. It's just the amount of exposure to light. Let's see if they glow. They've been, this is indoors. If you make a quilt like this, hang the quilt outside in the fresh air and in the bright light, and then bring it in, I know they would all glow. But let's see how it does with indoor light. And it's going to be hard to see because of the camera. And I know it did it before. And now it's just not picking them up. Now that kind of doesn't surprise me. There's the handy stitch. And when there's ambient light around, sometimes it won't show up as much. You can barely see the handy stitch on the camera, but in reality, it's actually fairly bright. Glow in the dark is really difficult to film, I think. The other ones are not. I think you can barely see that one circle on the black square. So it looks like a fail, but it's not a fail because of the flashlight. So I'll put the light back on again. I just want to see if it really is. I have a fluorescent light on. So let's just put a flashlight on this for a couple of seconds. I already know it's not a fail. I also already know the longer the stitches, such as the handy stitch, the more it's going to show up. That when I took this square in the other room, after doing this flashlight thing earlier, it was bright enough to see. So I know that if it's outside getting light, and then you bring it in, it'll be fine. Let's turn the light off again. And it actually is glowing. You can barely see it with the camera. I can see it, but the camera is having trouble picking it up. See? You can't even see my finger. My finger's on the outside of the circle. And you can't even see my finger. It is glowing. So the thread is worth it. If you make a specific project like this, I would almost recommend a longer stitch, even if you do circles, or maybe using a zigzag machine with a zigzag flower. Part of the issue is the tiny stitches on a Spartan, and even a handy stitch for the center designs. But it's definitely worth buying the glow-in-the-dark thread, and I had the flower foot, so I didn't really have to buy anything for that. So now I'll decide exactly what I'm going to do with these, and it'll be very easy to put a quilt together.